All right, so I wanted to record some thoughts that I had about something that I heard a few days ago, which I think is a pretty common sentiment among men. It was from this YouTuber who sort of talks about some of his problems that he had in his relationships with women. And, I think he makes some valid points and about, the direction that our culture has taken and how, it can be an uncomfortable prospect sometimes to be a man, and how you can feel like society does not really back you up or encourage you in the ways that you feel that is like your natural nature to be a certain way, and then it feels like you sort of have to you have to alter yourself in a way that is just not pleasant from the male perspective or male psychology, where you're not really encouraged to be a natural man. You're like encouraged to be some kind of, I don't know, just depending on the situation. You're just it feels like you're on your back foot a lot of the times, and I can definitely sympathize and agree with that general sentiment. And I think it might be true that both for men and women, that neither sex is really allowed to really express themselves and be themselves in a fully natural human way, but it definitely does feel like there's like this harsh presumption of guilt that there's something bad and wrong about men, and that like fundamentally our nature is like the more like aggressive, problematic nature of the two, at least in recent years. So anyhow, so I like listening to him sometimes, and I think he makes some interesting points, and I like that it's being brought up. But one of the things that he said that I found objectionable, because it's really I think a bit of a shallow prejudice, and I think it's a common male point of view, and that point of view being that talking about your problems and talking about your feelings in the talk therapy style is it only makes things worse, is what he said. That the more you talk about it, the worse it gets. And at the time, it like sat wrong with me, and it's obviously, as someone who's very interested in psychology, it just, rubs me the wrong way, because, I like examining the inner workings of the human mind, and, a big part of that is human emotions, talking about human emotions, figuring out where they come from, how they function, how they interact, and how they serve us, and how they can hinder us, and how our thinking can be stand in the way of living a happy and healthy life. And so, I think it's just, on the face of it, it's just, I understand that it's a common sentiment, but in order for us to solve any problem, we have to understand, we have to talk our way through it. And in order to gain understanding, we have to sort of find out what is really going on internally. And we can't do that from a purely rational point of view that only it considers, the logical perspective. We actually have to talk about what is it that is motivating our thoughts, because what motivates our thoughts is our feelings, and our feelings are sort of like habits. They're like emotional habits. So a lot of, what we feel, what we feel and what we think, we kind of take for granted. And we don't really understand where it comes from until we really take a look at it to find the origin of it. And then to work our way through to figure out how these things are getting in the way, because we keep keep creating situations where we're being driven by unexamined emotions that keep creating the same problem for us over and over and over, in our personal lives, in our relationships, in our relationship with ourselves. And so that's I think the point of talk therapy, is to learn to examine things within ourselves to get a better understanding. And so we're acting more from a conscious place. And sometimes it's not necessarily, you're not going to walk away from every session of therapy feeling good about yourself. You're not going to necessarily feel better because you've talked about it. Because feeling better is not necessarily you're not looking to feel better in the short term. You're looking to be able to function from a more natural, well-integrated place. And so, yes, if you ruminate on things and you reach every time you reach a certain threshold and you say, this is just getting worse and worse and worse. This is making me uncomfortable. I don't feel better. I feel worse. If you stop there, then your conclusion is going to be, therapy didn't work for me. I just got worse. But it's the point of it is to get past the point at which the feelings are triggered that make you feel this uncomfortable way where you don't feel in control, because you've reached emotions that you say, these are negative emotions that I don't want. But the truth is, these are normal feelings. These are things that exist inside of us. And, emotionally healthy people aren't afraid of what they feel. They can continue to function well within a very broad range of feeling, because they've fully examined their thoughts and how their thoughts are connected to their feelings. And so they become more high functioning under stress and in whatever situation, because they no longer view the world of their feelings as positive and negative. They just see, this is a feeling. This is the type of feeling that I experience under these circumstances, and it's not inherently negative. It's just something that needs to, that I need to be with and work through it, and to function more, have more agency in my life, I need to be able to function with stronger feelings, or feelings that I have some uncomfortable association with. And so that's that's my kind of understanding of it. But another, to take this a little bit further, it's kind of like saying that, it's like if you're overweight and you begin to exercise, and a lot of people who are overweight, I've talked to, I've encountered, and when the subject of exercise comes up, they say, oh no, I don't like that. It makes me feel uncomfortable. And that's, yes, it is, therapy, emotional therapy, talk therapy is going to be uncomfortable the way exercise is going to be uncomfortable for someone who is extremely out of shape, because emotionally the norm is with people that they are emotionally, so to speak, overweight or emotionally sedentary, and they only allow a certain range of emotions. It's kind of like how an overweight person thinks, to them it's very unnatural to be physical, to be physically active. And so the more they work out, the worse they may feel. And so they may work out, try it for a couple of months, but they're still overweight by the end of it. And then they say, well, I tried working out, but I just kept getting worse and worse. Well, they stopped before they got to the better point. They stopped before they're still overweight when they stopped working out, and their body was still used to functioning from an old paradigm, from a paradigm of an emotional habit, a lifestyle habit that became what was natural to them, but what is not natural or healthy for the human body to operate in. And so they stopped before their body learned a new habit. And new habits, emotional and physical, those can be challenging to program into ourselves later in life. And we should expect it to get uncomfortable and to get worse before it gets better. Therapy shouldn't necessarily, we shouldn't expect that therapy is like a comfortable, smooth, enjoyable experience. It's not. Real therapy involves going up against looking at the very things that you least want to look at. So it's going to be it's actually normal for it to be extremely terrifying and like unpleasant. And it takes a real courageous, a certain type of manliness to be able to endure having feelings that you don't want to look at and looking at them anyway and saying, hey, you know what? I want to find out who I am and what this life is like when I'm fully functional as a human being. And I'm going to do it even though it's fucking scary as shit. So, I think that's the more real manly approach to therapy, and not being like, oh, you just keep talking about it and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Well, it's because you not really have fully allowed yourself, your ego. See, part of it is your ego is part of the problem, because you're functioning from this point of view that somehow you're still holding on to this point of view that my way of doing things is correct. And so when you go into therapy and you think, oh, this is just going to be like something that is going to help me with some specific issue that I'm having in my life. No, like real therapy is going to restructure your entire way of looking at the world, and it's going to break down your ego, because your ego is what is part of the problem. And what is your ego? Well, your ego is your sense of survival, your sense of self. And so when you go into real therapy, you're going to feel like your life is at risk. You're going to feel extremely challenged. You're going to start getting nervous sweats. You're going to get like cold sweats, and you're going to be afraid, and you're going to feel like someone is trying to kill you, because in a real sense, the survival of your ego is at stake. Because what are we trying to what are we trying to alter? We're trying to alter the ego, the sense of self that gets in the way of healthy function. Because an ego that is very calcified into a certain position can have a very unhealthy attitude towards life. And so, looking at that can be extremely frightening. And it could, be like, oh, well, I just started having, PTSD flashbacks, and I just, it just got worse and worse, and I didn't want to do it. And, therapy is no good. Talking about it is no good. You just get worse and worse and worse. So yeah, from that point of view, if you don't really, if you have some part of yourself that doesn't want to really give up your old habits, if some part of you says, no, I like my emotional crutches, I like my eating my bags of candy, I like drinking my alcohol, I like smoking my cigarettes, I like thinking my thoughts that reinforce my victim point of view, and my disdain for others, or my holding on to the anger that I feel for certain people. And I really want to continue to live in this state of frustration, on a covert level. It's not conscious, it's not fully conscious. People say, like, I hate these cigarettes, I wish I could quit. Well, yeah, some part of them does, but the part of them that's still smoking, that's the part of them that's making the choice. And that's, like, emotionally, I think that's where a lot of us are left, is that, we wish we could stop living miserable lives because we can see that we're not comfortable, but we don't really want to change because we're still kind of like children, and we still kind of want to play our games the way we are used to. And so, to give you another example, it's kind of like the military. You go into the military, what do? They break you down, and they get rid of everything that makes you function poorly as a team member, as part of a cohesive unit. Because, before someone goes into the military, they've absorbed all their ways in their egocentric, sort of selfish kinds of ways, and they think, oh, my opinion matters, and I should be able to, be disrespectful and condescending and all this stuff, or I should be able to crack jokes at inappropriate times. But, when you're in the military, you're there to learn how to be an effective warrior, part of a unit. And, they don't want a bunch of, flaky individualist people who are going to interfere with the mission. So what are they going to do? They break you down. They break you down and they yell at you, and they make you, and then, they rebuild you. They rebuild you as a better team member, a better member of a group. And, this is not really, I'm not trying to endorse everything that the military does, but I'm just using this as an example, from as what is, effective therapy. Effective therapy, it breaks you down and then it rebuilds you. And the breaking down process, no one ever went to basic training and said, wow, I loved that experience. That was great when I got, yelled at and, told that I was a fucking dirty piece of shit, and, that my bunk isn't clean enough or something like that. I don't think most people enjoy that process, but it's like some things in life involve a lot of discomfort, and just because they're uncomfortable, like dealing with emotions that we don't want to deal with, it doesn't mean that it's unhealthy or that it's making things worse, because a lot of times, things will get worse until they get better. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference if we're in this egocentric point of view. Well, I know what I'm doing, I'm a logical male thinking person, and I think with my thoughts and I don't think with my feelings. Well, then you're going to be trapped. You're going to be trapped in that narrow point of view. And what's the real point of it? The real point of it is not to keep you safe, but to keep your ego safe. So anyhow, I just wanted to sort of comment on that, because it's like when I hear stuff like that, when you hear something that is part of the mainstream point of view, that is not my point of view or your own point of view. You know, it feels sort of emasculating. And like when you first hear it, you don't have like necessarily a response ready for it, but it's like, I don't know if I agree with that, but that, you know, I sort of feel like I should because I'm a man and he's like talking about manly stuff. But now I'm feeling like I'm like some pussy because I like to talk about my feelings and I like to think about my thoughts and think about the reasons why I do things. And I like to get really deep into this shit. And I like to, I like to yell and I like to cry and I like to be a fully functional, emotional human being, who allows myself to be in whatever feeling that I am and still function as a rational adult man in this world with lots of demands on me. So like when I heard that, at first I was like, oh, shit, I'm one of these pussies. I'm one of these pussies who likes to talk about what their feelings are. But, I think, as I think about it today, I think I found the right words to sort of like make peace with why I do the way that, why I view therapy as helpful and helpful for men who are willing to, not be emotionally controlled by their ego and, to be courageous in, an area that is sort of poo-pooed by even like the most manliest of men that I've, encountered in various walks of life. So anyhow, I think I've spoken my piece here. And anyhow, I'm going to enjoy the rest of my walk. You guys have a good one.